And we're recording now.
Yep.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. This is the 19th of August. Welcome to our Genie seminar. As usual, I remind everybody that this is being recorded for other public use. It'll be available on the internet, and if you care to share anything, that realize it is not necessarily going to be confidential. It'll be available to others. So we're going to, today's topic is a reasonable best measure of self-worth. We have gone through the seven word switches that elevate our thinking from our animal brain's way of thinking to our, what we call our genie organ, actually our cerebral cortex. But we're renaming it the genie organ because it is a wish-granting, puzzle-solving organ, whereas cerebral cortex only describes its anatomy. It just says that it's a cover for the animal brain, but it really has a wonderful function. So the genie organ really gives us a much more pragmatic name for this. And we've gone through these seven word switches, and last week we talked about the emotional self-endorsement, one of what I consider the two most important skills that teach us to love ourselves with the abundance that overflows to enrich the world, the modern version of the golden rule. Love ourselves with the abundance that overflows to enrich the world. So today we'll be listening to Brad's recording of the reasonable best measure of self-worth. I do want to just very quickly review what we've done in the past, so that remember that if we learn these simple explanations and use them daily, that will really make a difference in the way we're dealing with ourselves and with the world. So again, the first word switch was I think I can instead of they make me, or I can't, why bother, what's the use? I think I can is the energy word switch. It turns on our freedom, our independence. Our animal brain is continuously telling us what was useful for our ancestors. The second was I allow instead of they make me. We take responsibility for ourselves, cut out the blaming of others and blaming ourselves, which we call guilt. The third one was, if you recall, and I hope you'll be thinking of these in your own mind now, so that maybe you'll be doing this quick review, would be I could instead of I should. I could is the word that invites our human brain to answer questions, whereas should is the word that tells us what other people want us to do. And we all grow up as children with lots of shoulds. We get these fingers pointing directly at our face saying, this is what you should do. And we end up, when we don't do that, we feel guilt, and so on. We're taught to do that. And then the fourth word switch, we substitute both and for either or. Either or is the way we learn to think when we're children. We can only divide the world into us and them, right or wrong, good or bad. It's the basis why we have wars. We have tribal love. We love our tribe at the expense of other tribes. We have us and them. But both and is an amazing, powerful word switch that says that we are one, we're together, we're related, we're connected. And then, of course, the fifth word switch is actually a short sentence. And we said if this one sentence could be taught to everyone instantly, it would create world peace almost immediately. And that would be if we could teach ourselves to say what works for us and them, for my tribe and your tribe, for now and the future, instead of the sentence that most of us have taught to use and we automatically use, what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now. So we're just thinking of short-term gain instead of long-term pain. So we do things that helps us now, but we pay heavily later. So that simple word switch. And then we had the two switches that are the brakes that try to get rid of the old pattern, which is we substitute for energy. We substitute for fear anger and anxiety, which is basically the fight or flight response, which we all know and we inherit, we substitute energy, which says when we become aroused, the normal response that it leads to arousal, instead of calling it anxiety or energy and so on, that leads to fight or flight, when we think in terms of energy, it tells us we become more alert, more awakened to ask the question, what can we do to make things better? And then, of course, last week we had one of the, I think, the most important love creation skills that teaches the golden rule. When we learn to love ourselves, emotionally endorse ourselves, which most of us don't have we don't have the ability to teach ourselves when we're children. But when we become adults, we can take responsibility for ourselves. And to me, that's the basis of reciprocity. When we learn to endorse ourselves for when we do something worthwhile, we're no longer dependent on somebody else responding to us. And that is, we learn to give without feeling that we have to get something in return. When we learn to emotionally endorse ourselves, because we make a complete act, we do something worthwhile, and then we receive the benefit of our own self-endorsement, our own loving ourselves. So now we're going to go to the newest and the second of the two love creation switches. So we're going to turn on the recording that Brad has made for us. And as Brad says, this is your favorite part, right, Brad?
Oops, I did a mistake. 1 second. I have to share computer sound.
Today, I offer you one of the most effective and consistent strengths to become your own best friend lifelong and free yourself from dependency on dictators. Apply what I call the reasonable best strength. In any situation, simply recognize when you're doing your reasonable best and endorse yourself for doing so. You will create and maintain positive feelings about yourself. What is the reasonable best test? Most people evaluate their self-worth by the outcome of what they do. The reasonable best strength is an input measure of self-worth. It emphasizes your efforts, not the results of your efforts. In every situation in which you're trying to achieve a goal, you only have control of your input. The outcome is usually influenced by many factors that you can do little or nothing about. Unless you're a magician, you're unrealistic to expect that you can control the outcome of what you or others do. Yet most people have been taught since childhood to regulate their feelings about themselves by asking themselves the inappropriate outcome question, did it work out okay? As a child, you didn't have the mental resources to apply the reasonable best strength. You had no choice but to be dependent on others for your self-worth. Do you still depend on the outcome of your efforts as the primary measure of your self-worth? Consider these outcome measures that create a positive or negative feeling response. I'm okay if I won. My efforts worked out. They accept me. I got an A. He or she loves me. My salary is increased. The audience applauds. You understand. They think I'm attractive. I own a fill in the blank. The kids do well. I didn't make a mistake. You're utilizing healthy, realistic criteria to create positive feelings about yourself whenever you answer yes to the question, am I doing my reasonable best? Even if you don't attain the outcome you desire. Yes, there may be necessary hurt and trauma because of the outcome. Almost always, we can't control the consequences of events. We can control how we deal with them. We worsen and sustain the effect of an undesired outcome by attacking our own self-esteem. We often become our own worst enemy. The above is worthwhile reviewing a number of times. What follows will help clarify the key aspects of the reasonable best strength. But Isn't it only natural to feel bad when things don't work out? Of course. Most people would appropriately be disappointed, sad, or hurt when the outcome of their efforts doesn't work out the way they had hoped. Maybe you didn't get back the love you so desired from that special someone, or you didn't get that raise. In fact, you just lost your job after years of dedication to the same company. Or you recently discovered that your son is involved with drugs and is hanging out with friends that you consider undesirable. It's appropriate to experience discomfort and diminution of your spirits when things don't work out the way you would have liked, or when you've been treated unfairly. These feelings are normal and healthy, but you are designed to stand the hurt that comes when the world doesn't cooperate. Applying the reasonable best strand balances your pain or disappointment. By creating a sustained level of positive feelings about yourself, you become confident that you can manage your discomfort while facing the issues and attempting to resolve them. How do I know what my reasonable best is? Your reasonable best is the best you can do in a situation considering your limited resources. Your intelligence is far from perfect. You have restrictions of time and commitments to other obligations. Note that your reasonable best isn't your absolute best. For instance, suppose you want to win the annual bonus at work for obtaining the largest number of new accounts. You work at achieving this goal 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for several months. In this situation, you are doing your absolute best at the expense, by the way, of your spouse, children, friends, and even your health. This is more than most rational people would expect of you, and it's more than is wise for you to expect of yourself. If you're in doubt about what your reasonable best is, discuss your efforts and expectations with other people. Seek the views of others to enhance your own critical appraisal. Others' opinions may be helpful in shedding light on your blind spots. Some people, characteristically perfectionists, set such unrealistically high standards for themselves that they think they are never doing enough. They continually feel inadequate, even though they do far more than their reasonable best. Others feel good about their self, although they put forth little effort and accomplish almost nothing. Moderation in all things is often the wisest course to pursue. Discussing with others what you believe is your reasonable best can provide valuable guidelines for your use in setting realistic goals. The next time we meet, I want to answer a commonly asked question. Suppose I'm not doing my reasonable best. Don't I deserve to feel bad about myself? You'll love the answer. You will learn how to make the reasonable best test of self-worth a win-win skill that is 100% in your control. In part 1 of the strand on the reasonable best test of self-worth, you were urged to endorse yourself each time you made your reasonable best effort in any endeavor. Because you always have control over your input and rarely control the many factors that determine the outcome, you can consistently fulfill your needs for emotional satisfaction. Now, let's consider how to maintain our positive energy when you recognize you aren't doing your reasonable best. The question invariably pops up. Suppose I'm not doing my reasonable best. Don't I deserve to feel bad about myself? Certainly not. You'll always be less than perfect at doing your reasonable best. Improvement requires practice and patience. Setbacks are to be expected along the way. Each time you recognize you aren't doing your reasonable best, you create an opportunity to improve in your endeavors until you reach the level of your reasonable best. Your appropriate response is to say, I didn't do my reasonable best, but I'm recognizing the fact that I could be doing better. Only by recognizing an imperfection can I take the positive step of calling forth more effort and teaching myself to do better. I deserve to feel good about myself for facing my shortcoming. Most people beat on themselves when they discover they aren't the way they should be. Such self-put-downs lead to avoiding facing faults. Becoming aware of shortcomings, imperfections, or mistakes is your reasonable best. It is one of the most productive things that you can do because it affords you the opportunity to discover a better way. The reasonable best measure of self-worth prepares you to apply problem solving and learn from each of your mistakes. Teach yourself that earning the approval and love from others is one of our most worthwhile endeavors. But, as a bonus, not as a dependency requirement to sustain our own self-worth. We have all that it takes to fulfill our own requirement of love and have plenty that spills over to add to the world. As you consistently endorse yourself to fulfill your requirements for love and approval, you will genuinely offer love to others without the giving to get that is a common source of disappointment. There is no benefit to putting our self down because we are less than perfect, less than we would desire to be. This is a negative response that uses our valuable energy without correcting the situation. The most miserable people I know are often perfectionists. As it is, the mistakes we make or our occasional poor judgment will probably lead to unpleasant consequences. Why pay twice by attacking our self-worth? Once we pay for something, is it wise to keep going back to pay again and again? Would you pay for your groceries and then get back in line to pay again? Applying the reasonable best test as a measure of self-worth may feel awkward at first, just as mastering any new skill would. Learning to walk, talk, write, or play a musical instrument all require practice. Merely understanding the reasonable best test won't provide you with good feelings about yourself. You'll need lots of practice to become adept at using this input measure of self-worth. Think how often and how long you've been practicing being controlled by the outcome of your actions. Every person spends years, even decades, acquiring sufficient mental strength to assume responsibility for their own self-endorsement. In my observation, most people have difficulty getting themselves unstuck from our early addiction to others' approval. Instead of becoming our own person, we continue to let our mood be dependent on the weather. Which team won the game, whether the stock market went up or down, or preoccupation about what others think. We are like heroin addicts. We are love junkies, constantly seeking our next fix. Make the reasonable best test strength a habit by asking yourself frequently during the day, am I doing what I reasonably can? If the answer is yes, immediate enthusiastic self-endorsement is in order. See the strengths on self-endorsement, especially strength number 2 on emotional self-endorsement. If the answer is no, congratulate yourself for finding an opportunity to improve in your efforts. Ask yourself, what can I do to act more wisely now or in the future? Turn the answer to the question, am I doing my reasonable best, into a self-endorsing problem-solving response. Whether the answer is yes or no, you will have created a win-win situation for growth and self-worth. As you gain proficiency in this strand, you'll gradually free yourself from depending on others or on outside circumstances to maintain your self-worth. You'll consistently feel good about yourself because you can learn to do your reasonable best virtually 100% of the time.
I think that is such a powerful strand. I don't know if you all agree with me, but repeating that number of times and having it become automatic is really will change your life. And thank you, Brad, for a very nice narration.
I want to meet him one day.
Of that particular strand, as all the other ones. So the talking stick is available for anyone who would like to share. The more you share how this might relate to your own personal life, I think the more we will all learn and gain from this.
I have shared this earlier with this group, like some people in this group. One of the things that struck for me is when Brad says in that recording, would you stand in a line and pay for something and then go back and stand in the line again? So, but it is like it is silly to hear that, but all of us do this. And I had this experience where I was. Let me close this because this is making a lot of noise.
I keep thinking I should report to customer service or something.
Yeah. So once again, let me. Oh my God.
Dr. Pat, OR5 stat. Stat. Hurry up, forget it, he's gone.
Okay, I think now we have,
Yeah, that did it.
we have finally done this. Okay, so I was once in a bad shape, and I was just looking for some inspiration, and I heard this. I saw this video by this Swami. What he did is he shared a very nice joke with his audience, and everybody started laughing. It was a very good joke. I can't repeat it here because some of you might not understand, like all of you will not understand. It is something very Indian that he said, and everybody laughed at it. So what he did next is, after the laughter subsided, he repeated that joke again. Some of the people still laughed. Like some of them were like me. I laugh at jokes a lot. So then, after the second time the joke after subsided, he repeated the same joke again, third time.
Okay.
And then the laughter slowly converted into smiles, and smiles into some frowns and some wonder. And then after the 10th or 11th time when he repeated it, the entire audience was completely, they were like shell shocked. What happened? Why is this guy, is this crazy or what? Why is he doing it again and again? When everybody stopped laughing, he could not see anyone even smiling. He said, why are you guys not smiling? When I first told this joke, all of you laughed, but why are you not laughing now? He said, you have already told the joke 10 times. They said, like, you are repeating it again and again. He said, I am amazed how many times in your life, when something wrong happens to you, you are sad by a demise or something wrong. How many times you think in your mind about it and you become sad again, or you worry again? How many times do you do that? Don't you do that? Yes, they said, all of them said, yes, we do that. We always think about bad things that happen in our life, and it pulls us into depression again and again. He said, I find it very strange. When things happen good, you just enjoy for 5 minutes and forget it. But when bad things happen, you keep on remembering it. I thought it was an amazing episode.
Hmm. Oh. At least you could take a 10-minute set and turn it into 20 very easily, I guess.
I think it's because I've learned negativity has so much more energy than positivity. I don't know why. It just seems that way.
Maybe because it carries fear with it. So, no, I'm serious. That's fascinating. It's an interesting point, Josephine.
Yeah, and fear is more powerful than other emotions.
You know, in Ghostbusters, where I think it was Ghostbusters 1, where they had the plasma, and the reason why you know what I'm talking about, with they showed
Yes.
in New York, and every time people screamed at each other, the plasma kind of grew and grew and grew. It's the same kind of thing with negative energy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just don't know how we, as humans, change that to make positivity grow as quickly.
My friends, the few that I have, my friends used to say about my father My friend used to say about his father, he said, my father is not happy unless he's unhappy.
Mhm.
Some people are like that.
Was it Abby? Was it Abby?
No, it was the guy that told the same joke 15 times. He has no friends.
No, I think before this meeting started, Don and I were talking, and one of the things that he told me explains what you said, Josephine, very well. He said that we have, and he has repeated that several times in our group, is the animal brain versus the human brain. An animal brain, a billion-year-old animal brain that we have, versus the human brain, which is a couple of million years old. And the animal brain has throughout history has come up with all the struggles that over a billion years, that various levels of evolution that we went through, or the animal brain went through, and that is why it has all the negative feelings in it. But the human brain now, it has just developed and it is a baby, and that is where we have the so-called positive energy. And billion versus million, maybe Don, you can explain better than what I am doing.
Well, it's kind of a simple idea, really. Our ancestors lived in a savage world, and when they went to bed to sleep at night, they were thinking about the worst things that had to happen and anticipating the worst things. Or to put it another way, when you look at the glass that's half full and half empty, it was important to look at the empty part of the glass because that part threatened your life. You could be attacked by an animal or another tribe. So our ancestors were not noted for laughter. They did not laugh, just as animals don't laugh. But so our animal brain is already pre-programmed when we're born to anticipate the negative, the worst kinds of things. And the human brain, our genie organ, needs to be educated, needs to be taught to let go of the negative because we don't live in that world anymore. But you see, Einstein's I think one of his most brilliant insights was that we're all born addicted to this way of thinking, where our animal brain, as an adaptive way, has programmed us to look at the negative, the empty part of the glass. And there was very little value in thinking about of laughter or the positive things that are going on in our life situation. So unless we can get over this addiction, which we don't know we have, we will continue to do that. And that's one of the reasons why when we see another person, we tend to have fear rather than automatically have a sense of warmth and friendship. When we look at someone we don't know who looks different from us, or a tribe that has different ideas and so on, our immediate response is not, oh boy, this is something that's going to be beneficial for me. It's more a matter of there's danger here. Think about the idea of being extraterrestrials. Almost all of the thoughts that come up about extraterrestrials is they're out there to come to hurt us in some way. We don't think, oh boy, there's strange people out there coming to help us, to make us better. We're automatically programmed to think of the worst things, and it's that problem, it's that addiction that we're not aware of, that we need to confront, and we're not doing a very good job of that.
Well, if there are extraterrestrials monitoring our media and they happen to see the Real Housewives of Orange County, they will obliterate this planet in about 4 seconds.
I was just
think it's worthless,
I was just thinking in my own practice of psychiatry, there are a number of people who sort of expressed that idea, the idea that I never felt so good as when I felt miserable. It's the idea that unless we're worrying about something, then we're going to be in some danger. There was a well-known author I remember when I was working at the Federal Narcotics Hospital. I can't think of his name now, but he wrote the book, Keep This House Safe from Tigers. And he was a well-known, very, very well-known author. But the idea was, even though there are no tigers in New York City, as long as I kept thinking that there were no tigers to attack me, it seemed to work, because no tigers ever came to attack me. So he was convinced that as long as he kept thinking that there are no tigers, that was good. It's that kind of an idea. I never felt so good as when I worried enough.
Alexander?
I'm very intrigued by something Josephine said, and that is to you, maybe Don, you can answer this. Is there more power in negative energy than positive energy? And is there a way for us to make a change in that mix? And is that the essence of what we're doing here? I'm just curious as to your overview of that.
Well, it would be very simple, I think, is yes, the power of love and loving ourselves, the very things we've talked about. When we can teach ourselves to emotionally endorse ourselves, just because we inherit this negative addiction. The addiction we inherit at one time was positive. It protected us. But in today's world, where you have a nuclear weapon, where if you fight other people and drop a bomb on them that kills everything, what used to be positive, it used to be that if there wasn't enough food, those who survived were those who were the most powerful and who were prepared to do battle and kill the other tribe. But in today's world, it's just the opposite. You know, if everybody has today, when 9 countries have weapons that offer no opportunity for error, we've got to change our way of thinking, and we do that by teaching ourselves this new skill called unconditional love. But part of what we've talked about in these 2 strands that we just listened to is that it takes a lot of education to undo what's been happening over 1 billion years in our mind that we inherit. And then when we're children, we usually get more of the same because we're dependent on what other people teach us, which is usually, I mean, if you're very fortunate if you came from a family where it was always very loving and you were taught to endorse yourselves. But the way we educate ourselves, as we learned in the last strand, if you remember in the last strand, we said that most of us learn that if you that love only counts if it comes from someone else. You know, if you love yourself and endorse yourself, that's being self-centered. It's being egotistical. So we've been teaching ourselves just the opposite of what would be wise to teach ourselves, and we haven't learned to do that yet. But I think these kinds of meetings where we can learn these skills, that's why these 2 skills are so important. These are the powerful skills that teach us to take responsibility for ourselves and no longer go through life dependent on all those negative thoughts that we've acquired over 1 billion years that at one time were necessary when we lived in a savage environment. I hope that makes sense. To me, it makes a lot of sense.
I think one of the challenges with this particular saying that we're talking about today is the you know, when you apply it to your world, you know, it's a matter of what you attempt to do versus what you actually get done. So much of the world judges you and rewards you for what you actually get done. You know, in the corporate world, you know, a lot of times, you know, you're sort of beat up if you don't accomplish the goal. In wars, you still lose the war if you just say, well, I put in my best effort, you know, and you're fighting against somebody who is all consuming, you know, your reasonable best. You know, it just, those who put in more than their reasonable best are the winners. You know, those who accommodate their bosses, you know, get promoted and get more of the rewards that are associated with work. So, you know, you could argue that getting those rewards maybe isn't the ultimate goal and isn't the road to happiness, but there's a lot systematically in our society that does reward results, not inputs, or not the amount you do. And, you know, figuring out a way to balance that, you know, to show that there is some overall benefit to the rewards in you know, what's rewarded in the real world. I think that's a worthwhile conversation to have.
Obi, one thing, and I think we have had this discussion earlier, is this word reward is very vague, right? Just earning money, is that the reward that we want to look at? So I remember my father told this to me once. In the year 2000, his company was doing, you know, it was removing people. Ramp downing, and of all the people that got ramped down, my father was one of them. unlike all his colleagues who got kicked out, he was very happy because he went to his boss and he got a very good package, severance package. And although my mother cried for a few days, but we all settled down and we were very, like, he was very frugal. He somehow survived. And he told me he met his colleague 10 years after who was very happy that he was not kicked out. And they were both in a line in a post office for retirement benefits. They were both trying to get retirement benefits. And when his colleague met, he said, Ramdas, you did the best thing by getting out at that time without fighting. You know, I have got so much money now, but I have got diabetes. I have got high blood pressure. I have got this ailment. I have got that ailment. And all the money that I have, I can't eat well. I can't sleep well. My kids are enjoying all that money. I'm not getting anything out of this miserable life. So that day my father came and he came without a sweets and he told my mom, see, you were criticizing me on that day. See, I am healthy now. At least you have a husband who does, he's not on bed. So the rewards are, again, sometimes what we do is we look at rewards only in monetary manner. And I'm also like that. I'm not saying that you are like that. All of us are, we always count our blessings by what other people are not getting versus what we are getting or what we have. So reward is, I think, the best value of this video or whatever teaching is that we don't need to depend on external things or even on materialistic things to reward ourselves. We can simply reward ourselves by endorsing ourselves, and that is what we need at the end of the day.
So if I self-endorse myself for doing bad things, does that count too? Like if I,
It'll make everybody feel better, I'll tell you that right now.
Just wondering. I just
That's a brilliant
posing the question.
Over to Don.
Very good question.
Are you looking for a parole, John? Is that it? I mean,
John, I think the answer is yes. That's an interesting, but I think the answer is yes. And I think, Sharat's story, I don't know if it's a problem. We're just talking about how the individual deals with a situation, right? So I think whether or not the person, the way, Sharat gives the story, the people who were healthy, who didn't get rammed down or whatever it was called, are the ones who probably worked in a stressful environment but learned how to manipulate that environment to their advantage, so they didn't get all of those illnesses. I think it's how you, whatever the situation is presented before you, it's how you deal with it. So.
Right, but if I self-endorse myself for undermining my coworker to get ahead, but I feel good about it. Hey,
Yeah.
Because you got ahead.
Oh, John.
I think that's what. Yes.
Let's take an example. Let's take an example about that. Supposedly, let's take a person. We think of the person the characteristic person who's done the worst kinds of things. Someone like a Hitler. Hitler. And you have the idea that, gee, if I take people who don't have good German blood and I take their babies and throw them into the fire, I'm doing a good thing. The person feels pretty good about themselves. And they've done something which they feel is pretty good. But in the long run, the likelihood is that the overall system is going to cause that system to collapse, because the whole system then isn't going to work very well. Think of the way the body works. You have different organs in the body. The spleen does certain things, the liver does certain things, our heart does certain things. If each does what it is designed to do that contributes to the larger system, the whole system survives and is healthy. If any one part of the system decides to stop working, if the kidneys stop working or the heart stops working, the whole system falls apart. So part of, at least in my understanding, is that somehow if there is a creator, and I believe there is some kind of creative force, that we look at the model of our human body, which is the most advanced system probably in the world with 50 trillion or 30 trillion cells, that when the parts contribute to the whole system survives. When any part of it does negative things, it may take a while, but eventually the whole body and the whole system must fail or collapse. So you're right. That's what we've talked about: short-term gain for long-term pain. People who do negative things to the system. That is a cancer cell. Let's take a cancer cell. A cancer cell takes from the system, but it doesn't give much in return. That's what a cancer cell is. So what you're talking about, I think, John, is a cancer cell, someone who does negative things to the system for their own immediate benefit. And you say, yeah, they're doing some negative things as far as the system. In the short term, you get benefit, but in the long term, it collapses. And I think we can look at that situation in terms of our world today. When, for example, when we decide we're going to spend all our money now and forget about tomorrow, sure, we enjoy ourselves today. But what about tomorrow when we don't have food in the closet and so on? So that's part of the issue, I think.
So are you, I agree with your assessment, Don, but I think it presupposes that the person has a moral compass, or that there is a set of a set of morals or mores that they live by. What about the person who is kind of morally depraved? Does that equation work for them? Or, like I said, when they do something that they feel like they got over, or they're having success in doing bad things, it may not affect them in the same way. They may affect them in a positive way. I just bring up that thought of the criminal element or not the criminal element, but just, again, someone morally depraved.
I think that we get into really thin ice when we talk about a moral compass as a way of deciding what to do or not to do. Yes. I think in our species, and I don't think, I feel like I'm the negative person here, I don't think we can use body systems as an analogy to kind of living systems or systems that work. I'm not aware that the kidney has any intention to keep the rest of the body alive, or the heart has an intention to accomplish some greater goal. So I don't think we can use the notion of there's an intention of cooperation in order to make a whole system functional. Related, the notion of kind of morality and moral compass, to define what's good or not good for the system, I think is misguided. I think some of the most devout believers, blow themselves up and kill people, and if they live and find out they killed only 50 people instead of 100 people, they're upset with themselves because they didn't do their best. I really wanted to die, and I wanted to take 100 people with me, and look what I did. I lived, and I only killed 50. That person's intention, even though their behavior may be destructive from our point of view and heinous, their intention can be very devout. So I think it's very hard to look at the, when you say that, part of this lesson was, don't look at the outcome of what you do, but look at what you put into it. Look at your efforts. And I think we can't really have it both ways. We can't ignore the outcome and only look at the efforts, and we can't only look at the intent. So I think it gets, to me, I think this gets to be I think one of the central dogmas here of this undertaking is that the utility to the system, we're interested in preserving this system. We have some wannabe God perspective here that we want to make a system and behaviors that allow us and our species and our families to survive. And most systems or natural systems that we're trying to model ourselves after don't work that way unless you invoke God and say it's God's intent that we survive and that we're good. And I think I think this undertaking is one where we don't really want to invoke God. I don't think we want to really invoke a moral compass that defines what is beneficial to us or to the system, because then you get into everyone's personal view of what that moral compass, where it points.
Yeah, I think that very much makes sense as usual, Pacey. So I guess the net of it is that self-endorsement works both ways. It has the swinging door, whether I'm using it for negative or using it for amoral purposes or using it for moral purposes. That's not the question. It's really self-endorsement will promote a positive outcome, no matter if that positive outcome is an amoral one. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it reinforces the behavior that you're doing. We don't. It's hard for us to pass judgment on is it a good behavior or a bad behavior.
Right. So someone like Trump, who did I say that? I would never say that.
Hey, Pacey, one of the things that you said, again, that is the cause of all the problems, right? But what Obi was saying that earlier, we put efforts, but sometimes we don't get desired results. What Don is trying to teach us through this trend is what Lord Krishna taught. I'm missing actually Russell today. Lord Krishna taught Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, which was written 5,000 years ago. What he said is, your right is only to the effort that you put in. The results are in our hand. Now, if you don't want to bring God into the picture, then what Lord Krishna said is exactly what Don is saying. Just do your reasonable best and then endorse yourself for that. You become your own God for doing your reasonable best, because results are not in your hand. And that is the cause of all the misery in the world, because we put effort. We think we have put the best effort always, but the world doesn't align with our thoughts. And then we say, oh my God, this happened to me. Everybody is against me. And we make our lives more miserable. And then we say, okay, let me teach you. I will not put that effort. Suddenly, whatever we are capable of, we don't do that, or we do something wrong. And then we find ourselves in more trouble. So that is what is happening. If you see geopolitics, if you see corporate world, everywhere, simply, I think this is a great mantra for all of us to survive with if we can learn it. Again, our animal brain will not let us do this for long until we revise and practice this, is to do our reasonable best and endorse ourselves irrespective of what result it brings. I think that way we will survive, and even though we might not be billionaire, at least we'll have a good night's sleep.
I think that in some ways the reasonable best is working backwards. A lot of people are miserable because they're always criticizing themselves and saying to themselves, I'm unhappy because I've not accomplished what I want to. And by saying, well, let's talk about the input measure and how much you try rather than the output. Yes. And that alleviates this anxiety of not always getting 100 on your test and not always being picked for the job or whatever, which makes sense. Your life starts to get destructive if you do nothing but put yourself down, and you end up, not being able to do very much. So it's pragmatic to say, let me endorse myself for what I do and not put myself down for what I don't accomplish. And I think that works. And I don't know that it works all the time. It has to be some sort of a balance between what other people expect of you and what you expect of yourself, or what you try to do. I mean, you can define, if you use the golden rule as a compass, that's pretty good. But often what people do is they redefine it. And I'm thinking of Germany. and the attitude toward the Jews. When you so do unto others, Jews were defined as not really a worthy other. Jews weren't human. So you really didn't have to do anything good for these entities that weren't human. So people have all sorts of ways of getting out of doing what maybe we think they ought to do. And it is hard without a God that tells you the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. But I think it's possible because a lot of people have lived very good lives without that instructor to say what things are correct and what things not.
I think there is a concept of human nature at play in this. I think Pace's comment too about is there no moral compass, or it's thin ice when you are there. I think there is a little bit of what at the local level, what makes this appealing is the idea that people can avoid depression or be happy about themselves. I think there's a tenet that a lot of people aren't very happy about themselves. And is there something that people could do to improve their sense of happiness or self-content? And I think that there is. I think, that this concept that you beat on yourself less does yield more overall happiness than if you beat on yourself more. And, it does counteract some of the effects of depression. And, by saying, if you extend this a little bit further, can you stop suicide bombings and shooters and stuff if the population at large is overall reinforced to look at the positive more than the negative, or learn skills that improve your self-image versus take it down. So I think that there is some element of commonality there that does work and does kind of offer a compass, and maybe without having a God present. That there are just, there are people who tend to, if you're kind of miserable and you start thinking a certain way and be a little bit more positive of yourself and don't break yourself down, there is some overall benefit. And, if that can kind of be shared around, you can sort of improve or motivate others to improve their life. And I guess this gets back to, is there a certain element of human nature? I'm not quite sure. John's point is very interesting about, well, if somebody really is convinced that doing it for themselves is really the best, it starts to break down there a little bit. But I would gather to say there is some element of human nature that can act as a binding force, although it might be somewhat weak. And there's a lot of, corporations are successful, a lot of them, because they can come up with ways that really do depend on results, not just efforts. And I still offer maybe the most successful people have figured out a way to balance the two. But I know most of the corporations that I've worked for, they were very much result-oriented.
Sherrod has asked me to read this, which he has on his phone, and I'll read his quote, which is a Martin Luther King quote. If a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets, even as a Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well.
So if a street sweeper did his job well, he lived a good life. It is not necessary to be the CEO of IBM to be called a great man. So that's the bottom line. While John's question is very important, it was brought in extraneously to this. Whatever we heard had no moral, inclination to it. It was just, if you want to be more happy and loving, you have to self-endorse yourself. And I'm sure if Hitler back in 1939 met baby Don, we would not have Second World War.
All right, here's what I'm thinking. I have a lot of conversations with atheists, and they, to their credit, they agree that you can have a moral compass without believing in God. So you don't need to believe in a God or a higher entity to be a good person. So I don't want us to conflate the notion of religion and God with being a good person. Then back to John's point, I don't think a person, as he describes, who might be a bad person or do negative things to inflict pain and harm on another individual, right, would in any way be considered a good person, and take I don't know, should be lumped in the same category with what we're talking about regarding self-endorsement. So even if that negative person, self-endorse themselves for burning a baby, right? Does that make them somehow, in line with the thinking that we're talking about?
Killing a doctor who gives abortions is sort of
right.
Yeah.
Well, killing it, but still killing, right? There are different ways to change your views or change the views of society, change the views of that doctor without blowing him up and blowing up the clinic and killing a bunch of people. And then to the notion of a suicide bomber or a person who goes to the top of a building and start killing people. I think if these people self-endorse themselves a bit more, with positivity and love, they wouldn't do that. So I don't think we need to put John's thoughts in the same category as to what we're talking about. I think if people, to Sherrod's point, if Don talked to Hitler, he wouldn't have done what he did. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. So I think we're putting things together, but we're not putting them together in the right way. I think we're missing some of the points that Don is making. That's all.
My hero is someone that I think is a person worthy of listening to. You say when a person who's considered smart and brilliant speaks, I try to listen. And one of the people I've listened to is Einstein. And Einstein did not believe in a God, apparently, but he did say that he used an example of Swiss watch. A Swiss watch has many parts. And once he would see a Swiss watch, he realized that there must have been a creator of that watch. It just didn't happen. So there was some creative force that did this very complex thing. And he concluded that there must be some creative force that has created a law of orderliness and predictability. In other words, we live in one thing we can determine by common sense is and this was a belief. Of course, you cannot have not believe this, but he believed that we do live in a world of orderliness and predictability. And if you look at the human, our history, we realize the first cell was given by some creative force. Whoever created that first cell, there were three characteristics of that cell. The first one that made it different from inanimate objects was that the cell was an energy factory. It created energy and it interrelated with the outside world. The second of the characteristics was that it multiplied. It was designed to automatically reproduce itself and become more complex. So it became more sophisticated and complex because it was created that way. But the third, which was the most important, was the conclusion that that cell was designed to contribute the benefits of its energy to the greater complexity as it became more complex, so that when the cell became 2 cells or 3 cells, it then was automatically or designed to direct its energy for the benefit of the family. And when it became part of a tribe, it was designed to direct its energy for the benefit of the tribe. And as the tribes become interconnected, if we use that basic idea that the original creator is one of the characteristics was that you should direct your energy for the benefit of the larger system. So essentially, I think what Einstein was saying, we do live in a world of orderliness and predictability if you accept that. And we look at one of the characteristics is we're all born with the idea that with the intent to direct the product of our energy to the larger complexity. That's why I think this analogy of the body that you might criticize that yes, maybe there's no conscious awareness or intention. You know, the original cells, and for 3.5 billion years, we didn't have much self-consciousness. It's only in the last 50,000 years that we have words and language that we learn to have freedom of thinking and self-conscious, the self-awareness. We've always been dependent on other circumstances. What makes us unique is that we have this complex brain that has the ability to love itself, and by reflecting on itself, have a sense of freedom, mental freedom from the outside world. But that's the idea that automatically, if there is a world of orderliness, it seems like one of the characteristics of the original cell, whoever that creative force was, and Einstein said it wasn't necessarily God. God is our image of sort of a good person who intercedes occasionally to take care of good tribes and punishes bad tribes. That's the way most religions and fundamental views, I think, direct themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just another way of looking at things, that we live in a world of orderliness and predictability. And so there is a moral compass. We're not aware of it. We're just becoming aware of that moral compass. But what we have instead is what we're still evolved to the point of view of the animal brain, which says that let's compete for limited resources because that's the only way we know how. And what Einstein is telling us, if we teach ourselves a newer way of thinking, which we're trying to do here, that includes love and conceptual reality, abstract thoughts, which the animal brain does not have, that's the way we change the way the world operates, by teaching us a newer way of thinking. Well, we are running late, and we're going to give the opportunity for those to make the last comments here, and then we can carry this over to the following meetings. So anyone who'd like to make a comment, please do so now.
I think we have to be very careful about words that imply intent in evolution, and that there is some underlying moral compass. I think we really can't have it both ways, that you cite evolution, and that's the way our old animal brain came to be, and that's what we struggle with. I don't think we can have, I don't think this is a both-and opportunity. I don't think we can rely on evolution and say there is a God or there's an intent that we all work together and we survive. I think what's going on is we are taking over, or are trying to take over, our own evolution. And that's something that's a new phenomena, our own species evolution and our own species survival. We have our own intent about that. But I think we might be making a misstep to conclude or rely on the fact that there's intent that we survive, or that there's a God, or that there is a moral compass separate than that which we've created. I think that those are really incompatible with the idea of what we're trying to take, accepting responsibility for ourselves and our behavior. If we do accept that, then we own that responsibility. It doesn't belong to God or whatever moral compass or whatever intent is bringing us to some ultimate destination.
I won't argue, Pacey, but I disagree. I think
that there's something in our in our evolution that compels us to direct this intelligence to establish some sort of moral guidelines that we live by, so that we just are able to live our lives without impeding the ability of someone else to live their life. And obviously, when that happens, when we color outside the lines in that way, our own societal guidelines have to get us back on track.
Unlike Josephine, I will argue with you, Pacey, but at a later stage. After I teach you yoga.
Basil, you have any comment? You haven't said anything in our meeting. Do you have anything, or you want to pass here?
No specific comments.
Okay. Well, there's lots of food for thought here, and it's wonderful that we can disagree, that we can agree to disagree, and that's the way we eventually come views. If we can find a way to to me, the idea that the wonderful thing is we've been given the opportunity that no other creature has to become self-sufficient, to become freedom to manage our own, that we are creators. What's unique is that we've been given this wonderful new brain, this genie organ that can solve problems and grant wishes, that enables us to so to speak, become creators, to be, when people say there's some divine within us already, it's the idea that we've been given this wonderful opportunity to take responsibility for what we are and what we choose to become. That makes us the growing edge of this evolutionary process. And we're still a lot away from where we could be. I mean, it seems that we're still just young creatures. It's only within the last 50,000 years that we've had language and the ability to have self-consciousness. So this what makes us unique and remarkable from all other life, from my point of view. So,
do you want to consider maybe continuing this topic into next week? I think there's much more depth here than I think we may have would have scratched at the beginning.
Well, we've also learned that baby Don failed to stop Hitler at Munich. I think failed to stop Hitler at Munich. I think this needs to be probed further.
Yes, absolutely. And I personally just want to see Josephine and Pacey go at it. So
I don't know how you mean that, John, but
no, I had said.
Oh, there you go, right down into the gutter.
Well, that's where we have a meeting of the mind sometimes, you know.
Well, unfortunately, fortunately for Josephine, she just mentioned before her meeting that she's going to be traveling to China and other for the next 2 weeks. So we'll have to delay the you want to call it a confrontation, or rather a dialogue, a productive dialogue that will eventually lead to peace and harmony among Earth.
I think it might be worth waiting for Josephine to come back to continue.
Well, I will be on. Let me just say, I will be on next week. I don't travel until the week after. So, Pacey, get ready.
Okay. So are we agreeable that we'll continue this particular strand next week rather than go on to the one which is the why all this stuff works?
But it'll be moving from Zoom to pay-per-view.
No, one thing for sure. Pacey, maybe you need like some of the things that you said were not clear. So next week when we meet, instead of non-opening, maybe you can open and share your thoughts in a greater detail, so we can comment on it or we can share our thoughts on it. Pacey.
Sure, I would be happy to knock over the first domino.
And you know, maybe we can form alliances, you know, against Pacey to make sure that we have, we're all together on this. You know what I mean?
Somehow, I think this is working against what Don is trying to do here. You start talking about forming alliances. I don't know. This is how it all begins all over again.
It all degrades from here, right?
Brad, you are definitely not in my and John's tribe.
It's orthogonal to
Here we go.
Don's,
you see?
Well, this is a very good example that demonstrates how tribal we are. You know, the point that I've been trying to make is that we're addicted to being tribal, and we don't want to give that up. We want to continue to say that my way is the only way, the right way. We want to stick to there's no both and, that it's we have to stick with this us and them and good and bad. But that's the reason we have wars. Hopefully we'll get this resolved before somebody pushes the button.
Before I forget, Josephine, I'd like to wish you safe travels. I think that's wonderful that you're going to China. I'm sure you're very excited.
Yeah, I spent 2 years there, so I'm going back to visit friends. But thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. I'll be going to Jack Chen tonight for the dinner special.
Awesome.
We have to stop recording now.
Okay, we'll stop our recording.